Okay, so we'll open up the Legacy Lands Farm Conservation Work Session. And who is presenting?
Yeah, we have Public Works staff in here. We're just transitioning really quick. Just give them just a sec so they get to the table. Thank you.
And Chair, I'd like to make a statement before we go forward, if I may. I can't tell.
Ended the previous one.
Yeah.
Right. I just want to make a statement before this one gets started, if I may.
But I think you need to do it during the recording.
Oh, okay.
It is. We're recording now.
Okay, go ahead, Sue.
Thank you. I just want to declare a potential conflict with this with issue regarding conservation easements. My family is looking into the possibility of acquiring a conservation easement for our farm as part of our farm succession planning. So I intend to recuse myself from any votes and will refrain from providing any policy guidance, just to be cautious about that. Oh, he disappeared.
It looks like Chair Mevaji is not with us at the moment, so okay, he's just now getting moved back. So if he has an issue, then you'll continue, which I think we'll just be handing it over to staff for a presentation. Is he over?
Okay, I think I got my audio back. So something happened. I did hear everything that Sue said. Are you able to hear me right now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I appreciate Councilor Marshall's sensitivity to this. I did have one question, Sue, if you can hear me. Did you already apply or make the decision to apply? Because if you haven't applied or are not going to apply, then I think just announcing your possible interest is enough of a disclosure, but wouldn't require a full recusal. So I'm just wondering where you're at in the process.
Correct. Sure. Thank you for that. We've had one meeting. We've inquired. I don't believe there is an application process at this moment, but it's very preliminary. It's something that my family has talked about for a number of years because our intention is to preserve the farm in perpetuity. But I think this is in good hands, and I don't mind recusing myself. I'd just rather be absolutely clear that anything, I'm not trying to influence this process in any way to benefit myself.
Thank you very much. I think that takes a higher plane and an understanding of, having transparency with the public. We don't want to have any questions whatsoever. So thank you for that. Kathleen, are we ready to proceed?
Yes. Yes, Kevin Tyler is here and staff.
Good morning, Council. For the record, Kevin Tyler, Lands Manager with Clark County Public Works, and here with me today is Danielle Cowley, our Lands Coordinator. I'm going to let Danielle start the conversation off, and I'll jump in a little bit later.
So during the work session in August, we presented to Council on the objectives listed in this slide deck. The Natural Areas Acquisition Plan focuses on sub-watershed approaches and to identify prime farmland in Clark County. We're utilizing data from multiple sources, focusing on larger parcels near the urban growth boundary at risk of development and fragmentation. This effort will lean on the work done by others, similar to the Clark Conservation District. We also will conduct outreach to partners and farming community, inform them about farm conservation easement application opportunities, and then this outreach will include educational materials explaining the components of a farm easement, the County Council will address funding proposals for this initiative annually in the adopted capital plan.
So we wanted to focus in a little bit more on the different components of this framework that we discussed with council earlier in the year. And so, you know, first is where we focus conservation easement outreach and potential acquisition of easements. So, you know, generally we're looking for areas of prime agricultural potential. So different soils that, you know, there's lots of information out there in the world about what makes good agricultural soils, and we know where those exist in the county. And so we're partnering with organizations like the Conservation District, the Washington State University Extension, and Washington Farmland Trust, those experts in the agricultural community that can provide us with that information. You compare that with areas outside the urban growth boundary that are susceptible to development, R5, R10, and that are actively farming, these larger properties that are actively farming, and that's, you know, that's where we would begin the outreach with the farming community, the agricultural community, in an attempt to mitigate, you know, further fragmentation and loss of agriculture in the county. Funding that we've talked about is, you know, there's a couple of projects in the capital plan already that are underway. One that we hope is going to finish up this year. I keep saying that, and we're getting closer to be able to share information about that one farm that we're working on with the Washington Farmland Trust. There's another project in the capital plan for next year where we can do some outreach and pursue an active farm in the county somewhere. And then beyond that, as Danielle mentioned, we have the capital plan set up in a watershed approach, watershed sub-basin approach. And from 2027 to the end of the 6-year capital plan, there's $7.5 million in funding identified that's spread out across the county in these sub-basins as placeholders, and then that gives us the flexibility to pursue farm conservation or forest land conservation or, you know, fish and wildlife habitat conservation projects that are compatible with the natural areas acquisition plan. And the last time we talked about 500,000 annually being a good target to start with. Based on recent appraisal, it looks like $500,000 is about a 20 or so acre farm conservation easement. Again, that depends on, you know, the appraised value of development rights and where it is in the county. And so that can fluctuate up or down. We think 500,000 annually is roughly going to get us 20 acres. So every 2 years, it could do more like 40 acres, again, depending on the appraised value. And then we talk about farm management. So as we enter into these farm conservation easements, you know, we're looking for the landowner to develop a farm management plan that we can use to follow up on an annual basis. You know, doing yearly walkthroughs, monitoring of these farm conservation easements to make sure that there's compliance with the easement. But also balancing that with flexibility, understanding that farmers and agricultural producers change crops and allow fields to go fallow and things of that nature. And the last component is, you know, tools to make sure that we don't lose conservation easements to, you know, non-compliance. And one of those tools is, it's called the first right of refusal. It is an additional cost on top of the purchase of development rights that essentially prevents the sale of the property within a 10-year period. So that helps prevent the turnover that you might see as somebody sells a conservation easement and then very short period after that turns around and sells the property to somebody else who then decides not to farm and establish, you know, maybe just a residential estate. Those are expensive. They only last for 10 years, so I think our recommendation is to only pursue those when it's a particularly valuable piece of property that we might be pursuing. I think so. That summarizes the information that we presented in earlier in the year, and I believe the idea was to come back today and get feedback from all of the council present, and see if there's anything additional you'd like us to consider as we move forward with farm conservation in the county.
Okay, sorry, it took me several taps to unmute myself. So I would like first and foremost just to focus on item number 2, funding. The 7 million that's available, that's for all, that's basically our fund balance policy.
So the 7 million is what we have programmed in the capital budget from 2027 to 2030.
I'm sorry, say that again?
Yeah, so the 7.5 million is what we have programmed in the capital budget from 2027 to 2030. That and it's for all types of projects in the county. So that would be farm conservation, forest land conservation, fish and wildlife habitat conservation, city projects, Columbia Land Trust projects. So spread out across the whole county in just those 4 years.
That's forecast based on the revenue that we have experienced based on the conservation tax that's in place. Is that correct?
That is correct. It's based on the forecast, and it doesn't consider that there are a handful of projects that are in the capital plan for 24, 25, and 26 that we are hoping come to fruition. And with all of that, maintaining a fund balance based on the fund balance policy that council adopted earlier this year. So all of that into the projection for the 6-year forecast.
So here's my input, Tyler, because with all the critical lands, I think in my mind has the highest priority. But generally speaking, what we hear from constituents, whether within the urban areas or outside the urban areas, is preservation of open land and preservation specifically of our farms. And I think that has a lot of valuable repercussions if we are able to help preserve farmland. So 500,000 was, I think, a swag that staff took. I would like to see more of that $7 million allocated to the farm conservation effort. That's just my feeling, my guidance. I mean, I'd like to see it doubled from what you're projecting from 20 to 40 acres every other year. I mean, I'd like to see that doubled. So maybe $1 million allocated to the farm conservation effort. I like what you're doing. Otherwise, I have no other input. All the issues that you raised from first right of refusal, which are the most costly, everything included. I would just like to see a viable program that opens the aperture to small farms, 5 to 10 acres, to preserve it. So I would like to see more of the 7 million. Basically, I would take the swag of $1 million to start with and see how that plays out with our capacity to process them, with your capacity to walk through them to make sure that they're complying. That's just my input. Other counselors? Please, go ahead, Glenn.
It's been long enough since we've addressed this last that I have forgotten a lot of information. But I'm kind of trying. First, I guess I should ask this question first. What are you wanting from us today?
Yeah, our goal today is just to get your feedback on this framework that you see presented on the screen. Primarily, if we're off at all on focus areas and the funding side of things, I think the remaining, farm management and flexibility is pretty straightforward. So it's really the top 2 items that we're seeking council input on and direction today.
Okay, so I guess I feel like at least for number 2, I don't really have enough information to. I heard the chair's comments. I don't have enough information to be able to kind of give a recommendation as to where to weigh the spending. And then the other thing I would say is for the benefit of the public, could you explain how the 7 million is received by the county and what funds those are in?
Yeah, so the 7 million plus that's available for the county, that comes in through the Conservation Futures levy. The levy is programmed at 6.25 cents per thousand of assessed value. You know, based on assessed values in Clark County, we don't actually take in 6.25 cents per thousand. It's probably more like around 3 cents per thousand. We bring in between 2 and 2.5 million annually from that tax, and that goes into the Conservation Futures Fund to essentially for the county to pursue farm, forest, and open space conservation across the county. The Natural Areas Acquisition Plan is what guides that the acquisition of conservation properties in the county, and that is broken out by sub-watersheds, and within each sub-watershed, there's high-value conservation areas that are identified. Farm and forest are not mapped in the program in terms of high-value conservation area, but you know, those areas are definitely identified as being a priority in the Natural Areas Acquisition Plan. And what we've been discussing with council recently is how to focus more intentionally on farm conservation in the county.
Okay, and just one thing I would add is I personally believe that conservation has a value that's well worth the very small amount of tax that's being collected for this. But I think it's also important to note to the public that this is funding that has to go towards these types of projects. It can't be spent on anything else. So I just thought that was important to note. So thank you.
Further questions or comments? Any input on this topic? Well, I'm not hearing a whole lot of discussion. And thank you. Do you have any specific questions of whether you need 3 thumbs up or not at this point, or do you have enough guidance? I mean, I think I'm the only one that spoke up on raising that target 500,000 in item number 2 as far as funding. So I don't know if there's support by 2 other counselors on looking at different amounts. Everyone's pretty quiet. So at this point, do we have at least support for moving forward on this initiative? Okay, I'm seeing universal thumbs up. Super.
Okay, so the direction is move forward with what was presented and no adjustments to that.
Correct.
Just want to capture that for the record. Okay, thank you.
That's my take on the level of silence.
Yeah, if I could just make just one clarifying comment or suggestion, not related to conservation easement, but if farm and forest are not currently mapped in the legacy land map of lands, that would be really valuable to see how that all lays out related to the critical lands and other priorities that have been more the focus in past years. And I think it could be helpful with the comp plan update as well to see how that all lays out.
Yeah, that's something Danielle and I have talked about being a priority for us as we move into the next update of the Natural Areas Acquisition Plan, which I think is due in 2028. So we'll be working on that in the next 2 years.
Yep. So kind of in light of what Sue said, I have one additional comment because we have had some opposition from CCU and I don't think any others. And some of those, the opposition to this plan really showed a lack of understanding of what we were trying to do. And, even just the identification of appropriate soils for priorities and identifying farms to preserve, I think that was one of their objections, that wasn't being looked at. So public outreach throughout this process and give and take between these different organizations to get input from the Farm Bureau on, I think will be important to have the best possible program put in place, whatever the funding amounts are. And that obviously year to year, that can be adjusted depending on what the council sees as a priority. Yeah, so do you have a public outreach plan, Kevin?
We are working on that. Danielle's working on that. That is sort of, once we have the guidance from council, that's our next step, is the outreach piece.
Okay,
And just one
super.
last comment I'd just like to,
Go
for the
ahead.
public's benefit, that these legacy lands relies entirely on willing sellers and voluntary participation on the part of property owners. This is not a regulatory program.
Correct.
Yeah, thanks for that. That was another misconception I saw within the opposition, that it was somehow a restriction on property right. That, I think it sounds like everyone's gotten their questions asked. We'll go ahead and conclude the work session. Anything else, Kathleen? Otherwise, we'll see everyone for council time at 1.
Nothing further.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.